People say some memories never fade. Sometimes, they're beautiful moments. Other times, they're scars you carry in silence for years. She was just 16. Nothing special about that night, just a casual outing with a friend at a small-town bowling alley. The laughter, the crash of pins, the smell of greasy fries. Everything pointed to an ordinary evening. And then, there were the two boys. Strangers with easy smiles, hanging around the tables like they were waiting to be noticed. Her friend was quickly smitten, talking non-stop about going for a ride with them. She, on the other hand, hesitated. Her grandmother had made it crystal clear, don't leave the bowling alley without permission. But faced with her friend's insistence, the lingering stares, and that small inner voice whispering, "It's fine, nothing will happen," she gave in. The car rolled down a dark, aimless road. Minutes later, a casual excuse. One of the boys needed to pick up his truck. She got out alongside her friend, until her friend, with a careless tone, told her to stay. "He'll take you back to the bowling alley, don't worry." She didn't know it yet, but from that moment on, her life was about to change forever. The drive was short, then suddenly brutal. A turn, a deserted alley, and the world collapsed into suffocating silence. What happened in that car that night doesn't need graphic detail to be understood. An act forced upon her, a violence that brands itself into your memory. When it was over, he tossed her out of the car like unwanted baggage. Alone, on the side of the road, she walked back to the bowling alley, her heart pounding, her legs trembling. Inside, no one seemed to notice the chasm that had just opened beneath her. Her friend, far from being a comfort, accused her of lying. The words cut almost as deep as the assault itself. It was consensual. And deep inside, a certainty had already taken root. If she spoke, no one would believe her. If you're still listening, it's because you already feel this story runs far deeper than one night. Stay with me, because what happens next is both heartbreaking and unforgettable. She went home that night carrying something far heavier than anyone could see. She didn't tell her grandmother. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't tell anyone. In the shower, she stood under the water for what felt like hours, letting it burn her skin as if it could wash away what had happened. She cried until her body ached. But underneath the tears, a dangerous thought began to take root. This is my fault. Not because she had done anything wrong that night. She hadn't. But because she had broken her grandmother's rule and left the bowling alley. Somewhere in her mind, she convinced herself that if she hadn't disobeyed, none of this would have happened. And that's how shame works. It doesn't just hurt you, it convinces you that you deserve the pain. The weeks passed in a fog. She pushed the memory down as deep as she could, pretending it wasn't there. But silence has a way of building pressure. And eventually, it breaks. One day, she realized her body was changing. At first, she ignored it. Then came the undeniable signs: missed cycles, morning sickness. She couldn't escape the truth anymore. She was pregnant. The number from the doctor's office hit her like a hammer. 25 weeks. More than 6 months along. She hadn't even noticed. Or maybe, she hadn't let herself notice. Her world, already shattered, suddenly became unrecognizable. And the decision that would be made for her would haunt her for the rest of her life. If you've ever wondered how a single moment can echo for decades, you're about to see exactly how. Keep watching, because her next choice was something she thought she'd never forgive herself for. Her mother was the one who took her. No long conversation. No space for questions. Just a decision, made quickly, with the kind of finality that leaves no room for protest. They drove to a clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. Planned Parenthood. She was told it would be simple. That at 25 weeks, what was inside her was just tissue. A blob. Nothing human enough to matter. She wanted to believe them. It made it easier. It meant she didn't have to think about the truth. The procedure they used was called a saline injection. They explained it clinically, like reading from a manual. A solution injected into the womb, absorbed by the baby, causing termination. What they didn't say was that it would burn the baby from the inside out. She remembers the cold of the needle, the way the walls seemed to close in, and the smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. And then, waiting. Hours later, the contractions began. They hadn't told her she'd have to deliver. They made it sound like it would be like passing a clot. But there she was, in a hospital bed, in pain, delivering a baby she'd been told wasn't really a baby. The nurse forgot to close the curtain. She turned her head, and froze. There, in a small plastic bin, was a tiny body. Her baby. The sound that came out of her wasn't a scream. Not exactly. It was something deeper. Something primal. A sound you make when your heart breaks in a way you didn't know was possible. From that day forward, she felt like she stopped living. She started existing for one purpose: to die. Suicide attempts followed, none successful, but each one leaving her more convinced she wasn't meant to be here. Shame had moved in permanently. And it would not let go. If you think this is where the story ends, you're wrong. Because what happens years later will turn every part of this pain into something she never expected. Keep watching. Time didn't heal her. It didn't even dull the pain, it just buried it under more bad decisions, more numbness, more reasons to believe she didn't deserve a future. So when she found herself pregnant again, it wasn't hope she felt. It was the same suffocating panic. And once again, the decision was made: another abortion. This time, it was a suction procedure. No injections, no long wait. Just the sound of a machine. A sound she will never forget. The moment it started, something inside her snapped. She began screaming. Turn it off. Turn it off. Turn it off. But by the time anyone reacted, it was already over. Another life gone. Another piece of her heart carved away. Afterward, she walked out of that clinic with an emptiness so deep, it felt like a physical wound. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just shut down. Years blurred together after that. Relationships failed. Friendships faded. She was breathing, but she wasn't living. And then, against all odds, she became pregnant a third time. By then, she was convinced her life had no purpose, so what did it matter? She planned to do what she had done before. But this time, something happened. Someone who saw her as more than her mistakes, spoke to her differently. They didn't shame her. They didn't pressure her. They simply said, "You don't have to do this." And for the first time in years, she felt a tiny spark of something she thought she'd lost forever: choice. She kept that baby. It wasn't a sudden fix. It didn't erase the past. But it was the first crack in the wall she had built around herself. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. If you've made it this far, you know this story is about more than pain. It's about what comes after. And in her case, after is something you won't see coming. Years passed. She was raising her child, but the ghosts of the past still followed her everywhere she went. Then, in 2011, she did something she never imagined she could do. She reached out to the father of her second baby, the one she had aborted. She didn't know what would come of it. She half expected anger, resentment, maybe even rejection. But that's not what happened. The conversation was calm, honest. Painful, yes, but in that pain there was understanding. Forgiveness. Even friendship. Somehow, God had taken two people bound by tragedy and reshaped that bond into something healing. He became like a brother to her. That moment planted another seed inside her. Maybe telling her story could help someone else. So she started small. First at a local Right to Life rally in Brunswick, Georgia. Then at her church. And then, one night in Jacksonville, Florida, everything changed again. She was sitting on a couch with a small group of women. The room was quiet except for soft music, voices lifted in worship. She closed her eyes and began to pray. And then, without warning, she was somewhere else entirely. She was in a place so beautiful, it took her breath away. A park bench, gleaming with gold-like detail. Grass so green it seemed alive. Flowers unlike anything on earth. A river flowing with light instead of water. And then, she saw them. A little boy and a little girl, running toward her with pure joy on their faces. They climbed into her lap, one on each side, and began kissing her cheeks. "We forgive you, Mommy. We forgive you." Tears poured down her face. She could feel the warmth of their little lips, hear their voices as clearly as if they were right here. "We love you, Mommy. We'll see you again." And in the blink of an eye, she was back on the couch. If you think you know how this story ends, think again, because what she learned that day might just change how you see everything about life and death. She sat there in silence, her hands trembling, her face still wet with tears. She could still feel them, those tiny kisses on her cheeks. She could still hear their voices. And she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was real. 4 years, she had lived believing her children were gone forever, lost in a place she could never reach. But now, she knew where they were. She knew they were whole. She knew they were happy. And she knew they were waiting for her. From that day on, her story wasn't just about pain, it was about hope. She began speaking directly to women who had been where she was. Women who carried a weight so heavy, they could barely breathe. Women who wondered if their babies were okay, or if forgiveness was even possible. And her message was always the same. They are okay. They are with Jesus. They are loved, safe, and more joyful than you can imagine. And they forgive you. She would tell them, the shame you carry isn't yours to keep. God doesn't want you living under it. He wants to clothe you in righteousness, not regret. Her life didn't become perfect after that moment. But it became purposeful. The woman who once lived to die now lived to tell others that no mistake is beyond grace. And every time she spoke, she carried the memory of those little arms around her, those little voices telling her she was loved. One day, she knows, she'll see them again. But until then, she'll keep telling her story, not to reopen old wounds, but to show that healing is possible, even for the deepest scars. If this story touched you, share it. You never know whose life it might change. And if you're carrying your own pain, remember, you're not alone. There is hope, and it's closer than you think.